All right. Thank you and everyone for joining the Internet of Value Foundation, episode 128. And for all of those who get to listen to this information in the future, I hope you guys find it as valuable as I know I do it every single day. The diverse amount of mindsets and perspectives that I get to have in here and get to conversate all over the different topics and opinions on said topics. But welcome, Rose, the first one to the space. Feel free if you would like to come up. um, I, I'm having it more of a just a generalized space today. I don't know if I'm going to keep the hashtags in the top of the bubble as they are right now. Maybe we'll change them up, see if we can get some other faces in here, speak about other topics. But it's generalized conversation, whatever anybody wants to speak about, or um, if we don't get some more people in here, I'm going to post some topics above. I'll speak on them for a couple minutes and then close up. Hey, give me one moment. I go grab a couple things. Speaking about lasers earlier, so I'm gonna post some stuff on some cool laser techniques and get the conversation going. All right. So the first post I put up top right. It's a fun one. I'm not sure if you guys are into these physical tool sets that we could have, which by the enabling of microchips today, very simplistic, everyday designs of tools that we use, things that we use every single day without the knowledge that they could have capabilities beyond what we grasp for the initial usage. So I think that's really cool. It's the post all the way to the top right. It's just a couple different hacker tools, um, ways to prevent being hacked from in-person situations, and ways that you could say enable yourself to do simple hacks of everyday accessories and devices that we use. And so yeah, going over to my posts with the Department of Science. If anybody does want to take a moment, it's a decent article they posted there. The explanation behind the benefits between qubits and qdits, and if anybody would like, I could also go into you know some of the explanation behind qdits and qubits and the difference and what is the title of the term is trying to necessarily speak about, because qudits, which is a a larger capacity form of qubits, is relative in nature, to my understanding, from the measurement perspective of the quantum systems, the same type of systems, right, of quantum computing that could be utilized, except with different techniques in the processes of that data being able to be analyzed. And so typically, in qubit systems, quantum computing systems, they have operations through gates. And when a photon or a source of energy, right, from an atomic measurement standpoint, enters in through this gate and then proceeds out of the gate, there is a measurement taken. And that mathematical measurement is what helps enable the vast computation on a quantum computer. Now, one thing though that does occur between qubits and qudits is that qubits have have a large coherence issue. And so coherence being relative to the interactions of other electromagnetic frequencies, whether it be photons of light of source inside of the room, just radiation coming off of the equipment that's used to cool it, or even the circuitry that's used inside of the quantum computer itself, right? I mean, every particle in nature has some sort of relative magnetic field that exists around it. And so all of this being a huge coherence problem when it comes to trying to measure and analyze the direct input of the qubit mathematical notation that we're trying to understand, this measurement of it, of this source of energy. And so qubits are qubits that have been coupled together, entangled, that weren't necessarily entangled particles to begin with. And through this entanglement, you can have a larger input of ability to analyze and understand when it comes to things like quantum teleportation, possibly quantum communication, right? The ability to possibly entangle two different states and have that information be interpreted so that we can understand it from a mathematical standpoint, that we could use it for something in our everyday world, right? Whether it be like them, like I had mentioned before, quantum teleportation or quantum communication. Going over to the next article I posted up top from Brian, which some people are fans, some people aren't. He's posted plenty of things that I'm not necessarily a huge fan of, but we've had conversations before. I think he's a decent dude, and he posted a cool article though, right? And so article is from studyfinds.org, but they speak about the near flawless quantum teleportation demonstrated in a groundbreaking experiment in his post. So, you know, from his quote in it, right? It is theoretically possible, but is not going to happen in the next 100 years. Expert, and then it happened, right? And so it's really cool when you get to see an article that was just written, a year or so ago, talking about the ability to quantify the available information to understand something like quantum teleportation could be possible, and then put into right opinion that, well, it's probably going to take 100 years, and then a year later it's already been proven to be possible. And so very 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 small though in case study, right? The amount of information that has been able to be moved, very 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 uh, insignificant in a meaningful way for us, but proving the ability for it to be done possible. And this ability to exchange information from entangled states instantaneously, which, instant is as fast as it happened before you realized it happened, because we don't process things on an instantaneous scale. We process things on a second scale, which is why we use seconds and minutes and those occurrences of measures of time, because they're relative to us. We don't use things like milliseconds or nanoseconds to kind of try and, I did that 4 nanoseconds ago. Your brain can't even process in nanoseconds, right? I mean, I guess in a sense you are, but in an awareness state, you are not. And so it's really, really cool to see that, talking about qubits and qudits and these different quantum systems, and trying to get the information as coherent as possible so that we could then break it down to a computational system that is very simple in usage. So, syntax, right? The ability for us to have computational language where you're not having to communicate in bits or qubits, right? For this instance, which the difference between bits and qubits, the largest difference being bits operate as one or zero, so it either is a state of one or zero, and then qubits operating in a state of one, zero, or both, which could be looked at as also neither. Just depends on your opinion of it. But yeah, that's pretty cool. And so yeah, quantum teleportation, or this quantum communication. So if I'm not mistaken, it's been a little bit since I've read that article. However, I think it was just the ability to exchange information in the form of a multiple atoms, and I think it was two atoms or if I'm not mistaken, or it was three atoms that was actually used in when transferring the entangled information through states. And when you think about complex organisms, us being a highly complex organism, even take one of our cells, right? Just a single cell has anywhere between, I think, 8 to 12 atoms existing inside of the cell that composes of all the material that makes up the cell, um, being mostly empty. Just pretty cool if you think about it. That um, in itself, right? We're not even able to send information through an entangled state, which would be as complex of understanding as a cell in our body, right? And so, we're not anywhere close to sending apples through something like a quantum teleportation system, but the beginning is sending a couple atoms. Then maybe it gets to something more complex where we send a couple hundred atoms, which could possibly be something like an atom. And then further down that route of complexities and atomic makeups and molecules, where we kind of define what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. And of course, we're very close to this being a public possibility, where maybe relative to 20 years from now, we'll have quantum communication, quantum teleportation that could exist on the scale of trillions of atoms, right? Because that would be at minimum what we would need to at least transfer ourselves. We have about 38 to 44 trillion cells inside of our body. You figure 8 to 12 atoms at least inside of every cell, depending on the cell itself, right? Because some cells are larger than other cells. It's quite a lot of atoms that would need to be rearranged and entangled, and then proven to be possible to be recreated through states. So a lot, I said, I know. And anybody who's in the audience, please feel free to hit the request if you guys want to come up and talk about anything I spoke about, and or change the subject, because this is a relatively general conversation for today. But I'm just going about myself and my own topics, unless anybody wants to speak about anything else. I'll give a moment for anybody to come up. Sorry about that. As I stepped away for a second there, I got a phone call, so interjecting uh, um, moments there. Oop, sorry. Welcome up, Ledger.
Hey, Death Ranger. I don't have much. I just got home from a long day of work in Paris, but I love hearing you speak, and what you're talking about is pretty awesome. Yeah, I came in. I didn't. I'm just catching up on what's going on. Rose sent me an invite to your space, and one thing I can do is say thank you for the support that you've shown. Um, Well, the community as a whole, but me and what I've been doing recently. So I don't hear you speak too much in my spaces, but I see you there all the time, and I really appreciate you showing up. So yeah, if there's something I can do downstream to help contribute to what you're doing, I'm more than happy to. Um, I was actually talking about cells. Okay, now you got me started. I was talking about cells and addiction yesterday, and what like we have a friend who is one of the staff at the residency, and a lot of people in Paris still smoke cigarettes. And I was explaining that, and I don't know, this is only related because it's at the cellular level, but you know what you said kind of reminded me of what I was talking about. and that on the outside of the nucleus of a cell is endoplasmic reticulum. And what endoplasmic reticulum does is it facilitates the movement of things from, maybe it's the cell membrane. I guess it's the nucleus, but endoplasmic reticulum facilitates the movement of particles from outside the cell to inside the cell, and that sort of helps feed it. So when we become addicted to something, our cells actually develop more endoplasmic reticulum to facilitate this movement. And so what we feel is a mental dependency on something is actually a physiological dependency, in that at the cellular level, as beings, our cells are craving and crying out for whatever it is. And it can be a toxin like alcohol, it can be sugar, it could be any entity at all. So I mean, that's all. I wanted to sound smart, so that's something I know about that kind of is interesting. But when you do speak to somebody that has an addiction, as I did just earlier today, it's important to know what they're dealing with, and most people themselves don't really understand about that. So I hope that's viewed as a contribution. Again, I'm just glad to be here. Thank you for having me up.
I really appreciate that. And that was a great contribution. And, you know, Ledger, you in particular have a pattern set of recognizable characteristics that I, in particular, find very interesting. And so that's, why I continue to show effort. There's not many people who can come to the space, say, I have a great idea, but I don't know how to do it. How do I make this possible? And then go out and actually learn the skills to make it possible. It's a very, very small percentage of the population that exists that's able to actually capable to do that. And I said something earlier, and I kind of was going over it in my head, and I was like, wait, I think I actually mistaken myself, and I double checked myself, and I referenced back, and I did mistake myself. There's 8 to 12 strands of DNA typically in each cell. There's an estimated 100 trillion atoms per cell. I knew my numbers were off a little bit, but it's quite a big difference when you think about quantum communication of even just transporting one cell, right? That might be hundreds of trillions of atoms or 100 trillion atoms. And of course, that's an estimate, but yeah. And back to what you had said, though, Ledger, you know, it's really interesting when you think about the cell from an expansion contrast point of view, and the amount of things that we actually devour, right, and take inside of our bodies, that then our cells are expected to actually do whatever they are supposed to do with them, whether it be take the nutrients from it and expel the waste, or destroy it if it's bacteria, or any sort of relation to transporting the hormones based on the body based off of what it has just taken from the food. And so, the cells, right, having this expansion contrasting going on, the amount of things, and we, from like a more of a, this is more of like an American society or Western society, the more with the things that we intake, right, we take food, and then we take antibiotics, or we take antihistamines, and then you're drinking alcohol, and you're doing so many different things all at once, and so many of us, you get lost, right, in it sometimes, or you're just living your life. I had a couple mints, right, and then I had food, and then I had a soda afterwards. All these different chemicals that have to fill our cells totally have some sort of um, altering state of effect in the way that the cell itself, right, and the cells are behaving, of course, because they're being forced in this sense, just like you had mentioned, right, from a physical sense, to do all of these different actions that, right, from at least from our physiologically standpoint, from a historical standpoint, have never experienced up until the last 50 years or so. So we've definitely seen a couple generational effects, in my opinion, on some of those things. Not for the better for the most cases, but I think that we all are also an extremely adaptive species, and so something that may hurt a lot will eventually make individuals much more powerful, and so for the longevity of the species, that is still somewhat of a benefit. But even take it one step further when it comes to something like addiction and drugs. Go all the way down to the DNA, which, depending on the DNA's expressions, is the way that the cell will know how to behave, and its physical makeup, right? I mean, the literal physical makeup of the cell itself, which then determines, of course, all of these different things about us, whether it be your eye color or your hair color or what you look like, or how you act and how you feel. um, and the DNA, dependent on its interactions, and this is, of course, goes to things like epigenetics, right, which is the study of the interactions of DNA through a complexity of time and the changes through that time. And yeah, I mean, there is such a vast expressional difference that you are able to see in the DNA of those who may have the typical addictive tendencies, whether it be drugs or soda or whatever it may be, smoking cigarettes, which is, of course, probably still one of the largest in the world behind caffeine, which is the most addictive substance utilized in the world. Um, it's very interesting to think about, if we learn to alter, which we are, and there are techniques that are great at this and techniques that maybe are not so great at this, but alter the states of those expressions to interact with those states of DNA in a way that we know what the outcome of the expressions are going to be. Well, we could also cure addiction in general. I mean, disease, yeah, any ailment that could come to the cellular formations of the body could very well be cured. And there's a few people working on this, but there's somebody from Harvard who's the head of DNA research, and they're him and it's actually, you know what? Let me go get the video. But himself and his team are trying to produce a drug in the next couple of years that will be somewhat affordable, that will be able to cure any ailment inside of the body, particularly targeting, I think, eye tissue to start off with, and brain tissue.
Here's the problem with that model right now, and I believe that we would be further along if this weren't true, in that um, utilizing our addictive properties against us as a buyer is much more profitable than curing the addictions. So, one thing that's very evident being here in Paris, is that the food ingredients, are much healthier here than our American diet. And what has happened where we live is that we are fed food components that that are very addictive or that have a negative effect on us. And from a global perspective, it's well known. Many of our bioengineered food products aren't allowed by foreign governments. It's only in the U.S. And to touch back on what you were saying about DNA interactions, and what I was saying about cellular level interactions, is that we can even be smart, we can be intelligent, we can be educated and know what things do from our education, but when we apply them to ourselves, we have this disconnect where things are always occurring for the wrong reason. And we say it's science or pseudo, not even pseudoscience. It's a form of science. It's sort of a very short path that's more based on reasoning, false reasoning, than real science. In that, my example of addiction at a cellular level is just it. We don't really look at it like that. It's not Addiction isn't marketed or advertised like that. It's a human flaw. It's a human weakness. It's not a real fact-based science. And one of the things that I advocate against, and you don't see it over here almost at all. I'll have to go to the store again and take a look. But the heavy use of diet products containing aspartame. I do see Coke Zero, and that is one of the only products that I see that has aspartame in it. And aspartame is a pure poison, among a lot of other things that we take in on a very, very regular basis. So, one thing I will say, half the population does smoke cigarettes, but you see very few overweight or obese or whatever you want to call it. People here in Paris are mostly trim, and they live in a city, they don't have access to a whole lot of exercise. Everybody walks and public transportation is king. Um, but the diet is so much better here, despite, like, oh my gosh, the carbs. I you cannot believe how good the bread products are. And one of the problems that we have with our bread products, my father-in-law was a bread delivery guy, and when he started his route back in the, I don't know, late 70s, maybe early 80s, bread had about a 5-day shelf life. And that's sliced bread. Sliced bread really changed everything for preservatives in food. So the bread companies paid a lot of money for longer shelf lives. And he told me about, he knew the bread dates because the bread would expire before he came back to revisit his route. So then all of a sudden, they have bread with a 7-day expiration, and he's only having to adjust the shelves once per week. And now modern bread has about a 10-day plus expiration, a 10-day shelf life. And it is just because of pure preservatives. And the preservatives are so prolific now that when you taste these fresh bread products, and you can get a baguette every day, people come home from the bakery with a fresh baguette. It costs $1 for a baguette. And it's the best, the freshest, best tasting bread you could ever ask for. So it's possible to do. It's just that we are in an economy of efficiency, where we don't want to waste any time in the States. And also, the way our city structure is, you don't have the resources where, I mean, on every street here there's a bakery, every other street has a butcher. I mean, it's really cool. I mean, it's neat to see, and it keeps things really, really fresh. But people here, they shop every day. They get off of work, they come home, they pop into whatever store they need something from, and put fresh groceries on the table almost every single day. And we evolved from that. We started evolving, like in the, well, I would say maybe even as far back as the 50s, but certainly the 70s and 80s. And especially when we moved towards having the requirement of having two income households, and not allowing one person from a married couple be able to, do perform the requirements that it takes to, keep a household into fresh products. So I find it very interesting from a variety of perspectives to be here and see how the culture and how the city works. I'm not a city guy. I'm from Montana. I'm from California, but I live in Montana. We don't have anything like this here, but we have a lot of farm to table there, but still our groceries are toxic.
Yeah, and there, you know, that's what I was going to say too, right? There are a lot of places, and still there's a lot of things you can do to get around it in certain places, right? Depending on where you live, like you said, farm to table, you can really minimize what you buy at a grocery store. Um, but there are also locations that don't have that at all, and there are plenty of locations in our country that don't have those resources at all, and so they're kind of forced to, just purchase like whatever is available at the grocery store. And yeah, even the standards of oh, perfect, nice. Got the video. All right, I posted it up top from David Sinclair, and it's an interview from Neil deGrasse. But David's standpoint on this particular reason on why he's making the drug, the way that they're making the drug. Right, I say it. I use the term, right, healing DNA or healing cells, but he's looking at it from a different standpoint. He's looking at it from like an aging standpoint, where I love the title of that video. But is aging a disease? And so his point of view, right, is looking at aging as more of a disease, which kind of, if you think about classification of what a disease is technically a sickness that kills you over time. Aging is kind of that, so it does fit pretty well. But his reasoning on why, and of course the study, if you want, it's like a nice little hour clip. But he goes into the cost of the drug, how close they are to being able to try and mass produce it, and the reasoning for it. And yeah, I agree with you. Something you initially said earlier, right, Ledger, which they'll never cure addiction, right? And I agree. Nothing that you would ever be able to, unless we get to this point where, of course, society changes from a sociological means of incentivization of how we interact with each other, meaning we don't use monetary structure, right? There's no monetary structure. There's absolutely no need for you to have to want to charge me for something that you're going to produce, right? You do it because it's part of society and society as a whole in that sense. And that's more of like the Star Trek realm where I think we get to long term, right? Because we're going to be forced to get to that point, or we'll end up in the opposite, which would be like an apocalypse, because it's just the way that technology is kind of rooting us in this. And this, we're creating so many different efficiencies. We're either going to get to a point where society is able to run itself, and this gives vast amount of opportunity to the minds who are willing to do things, create efficiencies and inventions to go out and do that, right? Or we'll end up just all destroying each other. So it's maybe there's an in between, but I don't really see much of that in between. I see our species as very extreme. We're all kind of, we all have these moments of very extreme um, beliefs, and it typically tends us to lead in one side or the next. Um, Nonetheless, I think um, if we don't get to that point, or on the road to that point, while we're still at that kind of phase where you're right, I don't think anything would ever be offered to you unless, of course, it was a vast amount of monetary wealth that was being paid forward for, that you'd ever be able to just cure yourself forever. But the idea is you can cure yourself at that moment in time, and possibly, in David's opinion, it, essentially have you age 10 years earlier or younger, right? And so you can be able to alter the expressions in your DNA, and the cells which retain the information of the previous cells that they created, all the way down to the stem cell, which is very interesting. All of our cells have this information. It's called the cellular information theory, and they all have this previous state of information. And so if we can kind of reboot our cells like a computer, and basically upload the files of the right original state, and help this spread through the body, I think it's really cool to think that like every 10 years you could essentially go from 30 to 40 back down to 30 from a physical standpoint. And but that's not like a be all end all, right? That means that every 10 years you essentially still need to come in for whatever treatment would be. And of course, I think technology is only going to get better as long as we survive as a species. And so I think there's a lot of upside on that. And his idea, at least, is what he's trying to do is, and they of course already have patents and everything, in a company trying to produce the drug after human tests, which will be starting this year, human trials. Um, You're gonna try and produce it for $10 a drug or supplement, whatever it may be. I don't know how many you would need, but I think that's pretty cool and cost efficient.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious to follow that along, and I do, I'm optimistic that we're heading towards something like what you described. I think as technological as we are, I think a lot of technologies that don't suit the current gatekeepers are really being allowed to flourish. It's funny because you mentioned Star Trek, And one thing, I mean, I grew up watching Star Trek, I think when it was like, no, no, it was a little bit late, but my dad always watched Star Trek. And one thing that always stood out was the medicine practiced on Star Trek and how they, it might have been in a movie, one of the movies, but they one of the old movies, old Star Trek movies, they alluded to what we consider modern medicine to be so barbaric. And when you look at what we do still in medicine, and, radiation and chemotherapy are good examples of, trying to cure something by killing everything around it. Antibiotics are another example of, you know, I mean, we look at it now and we can talk about medicine being advanced from our perspective, but the end point, I believe, is going to be so much further advanced that what we're doing right now will be viewed as barbaric. And one more thing, I posted a quote as a response to Bias Goose and something he said earlier today, in that there's a saying that if you are the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So spaces like yours, Death Ranger, I feel like absolutely are the right room to be in, and I appreciate the education you are providing for us all.
Well, I appreciate your kind words, and I couldn't agree more as well. It's the only way you grow is being challenged by peers. I should say it's the best way to grow, in my opinion. And I agree with the upsides, right? I think the upsides um, are vast, and the reason why technology evolves so slow is because of the upsides being so vast. Going to the thought of something like electric vehicles or batteries in general, with the study of batteries and um, thermonuclear radiation. I mean, you can kind of go to all of these different things. Oof, gosh, hydrogen, right? Hydrogen cars, hydrogen flying vehicles, all of these things that are being established today. We could have had flying vehicles back in the 1950s. The problem is that that we wouldn't have had Ford, right? And we wouldn't have your Mercedes today, and we wouldn't have these big name brands that essentially own the entire market. And of course, that's depending on where you are in the world, but there's an association between all of them through banks, right? I mean, they're all essentially funded by the same operations. In the end of the day, same people. You're just buying a different look, a different name, and yeah. So I mean, that is something that probably does stick around. I agree. We'd probably see uh, a whole lot of terror between our species before we saw changes in that, and maybe that does happen, right? There's nothing that says that the species doesn't become more aware and wants to change this kind of incentivization metric in which that we all have that we interact with each other. Um, I don't think it does have to, though. I think we, as a species, we vastly improve and use these efficiencies and tools, even in this monetary type society. Even if we don't get to that, that Borg type society, or that, right, that idealistic Star Trek sociological means between all of the people. I think we still advance to become a multiplanetary species, and then maybe at that point, then things start to look a little bit different, because of course you would have different operations existing and such magnitudes of distance from each other. People could decide they want to live different sociological means of structures of society, and I think that's also really interesting.
I have two really quick points. Number one, most people don't realize, but electric transportation was not only popular but very prolific. I think it was in the 20s and the 30s. And you're correct. It was Ford and eventually Ford, Chevy, and Chrysler that put the kibosh on that. And then the other thing, oh, what was the other thing? Electric transportation. Oh, you know, AI and language learning models and big data and these things all working in tandem are going to accelerate our they're going to accelerate medicine dramatically. So I am in my residency cohort. There is a builder who is working on a blockchain based technology that uses AI as a predictive mechanism that potentially will give an early warning for things like cancer, diabetes, Parkinson, um, you know, diseases like that. That it doesn't tell you that you'll have it or not. It tells you whether you're susceptible to it. But the amazing thing in talking with this guy is that in the early testing phases of this, they pose the question to their test subjects, do you want to know? And he himself and about 75% of the test group doesn't want to know. So for that to be effective, it has to be accepted, but we're still so fearful because what's going to happen is what's going to happen, but because there's still no cure for many of these diseases and they're either debilitating or terminal, human nature doesn't want to know. They would rather just live to the point of the disease revealing itself and dealing it with it then. It's the proverbial kicking of the can down the road. So I thought that was very, very interesting. But yeah, I did a space with Treasury, and they had an industry leader on AI in medicine, and he had some very, very provocative things to say about it, and it just paints this picture of what's possible. And I think that we're going to have maybe like a medical renaissance or, maybe its own sort of industrial revolution in medicine very quickly and other things as well. But medicine, I do believe, I mean, what an amazing time to be alive. When I was a kid, I don't know if you could tell, but I'm a little bit older than most in this space. My phone was attached to the wall. Pong was my first video game console, and nobody had a computer or internet in their house. So to be this far along now and growing up watching those Star Trek movies, every now and then you see video clips or shows about Star Trek technologies that are now, everyday items, and it's just mind blowing. I love being in the technological space at this time, and we do have great opportunities to be pioneers and innovators or know them and encourage them right now in real time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. AI, as much as I think it's a misnomer of a term, but these smart tooling sets that we have established as this open source knowledge already, and the further vastness of the exponential growth that these mathematical protocols will be able to enable through interoperable means of like applications. Yeah, I mean, just take one thing, right? Like think of like a CAT scan today. There is already technology that's coming out, and this is, you can look at like CERN with the Large Hadron Collider, and particularly Alice, which is one of their detecting systems on the Large Hadron Collider. I mean, the efficiency between doing something like sonar and and like a CAT scan now, the efficiencies they have with being able to detect the positron annihilation when you're firing electrons right through us, and the positrons are being annihilated, gives such a clear look in what is actually being observed upon, right? The structure beneath your skin, of course, and whatever necessarily is being scanned, and just that alone, right? Like, yeah, I think we need a medical renaissance from a world standpoint. I think it's like a must. If you look at Western culture at the moment, we have we have definitely we have definitely seen some more healthier times possibly in our species, and not, you know, right, right. I think we where we are in modern medicine is definitely uh, feats, at least comparably to possibly like something like 100 150 years ago. But yeah, I agree, right? We have like things like immunotherapies out there. We have gene expression therapies out there, which is somewhat like an immunotherapy. There's no reason to do chemotherapy, right? And it is the golden standard in the United States. And if you're a doctor, you will literally lose your job if you don't recommend it. You can't recommend it, right? It has to be under experimental today still. And so, yeah, there's a lot of standard things that I think are messed up. And that's more United States than anything. I mean, there's a lot of places in Europe that you can go to and other places in the world that they won't. They chemotherapy is not going to be an option for you, right? There, you have oxygen chambers, right? Because you think about it from a cancer standpoint, or depending on the disease, of course. But I'll talk about cancer, right? Cancer is tumors, right? A tumor that your body um, essentially put together, right? Because what is a tumor? It's a whole bunch of abnormal cells that your body has put in this containment cell, right? And then typically mucus forms over this. This is part of the unfortunate disease of the body trying to defend itself and remove what it thinks to be a toxin. And then, you know, if you look at cancer, and of course, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a medical professional, so don't take me for any of this, but from people I've spoken with and things that I've seen, if you always look at cancer, right? Cancer is dark. If you look at cells, there is actually light or a thermal a thermal output that is being done. When you actually look at the cells of cancer tumors, the body has actually concealed it inside of this tumor, and there's no enabling of light, which could also be thought of as oxygen, able to enter the area. Now, oxygen chambers, which like pump that 100% oxygen into the chamber, which forces you to breathe this in over a course of period of time, I have seen be something that could be used to help cure cancer. And then, of course, there's other things like walking through forests of pine trees. This could help every single day if you're feeling ill. Pine trees have antiseptic naturally in them that helps the body boost the metabolism, which of course the metabolism is the currency of the body, as I like to call it. But all of these different things, all of these different methods that could be used, but of course it's not, because it's not profitable in some cases, and insurance doesn't want to cover it. So yeah, there are definitely things that could change, and I think they will, and I think they'll, in some cases, right, like the way that we think of doctors today, and medical professionals, the whole industry is going to be forced to change. They're going to be toppled over by these smart tooling sets, which will do all of the things that they're doing for the most part, with higher efficiencies in probably the next 5 to 10 years, and are already doing in things like surgery. Right? I mean, there are robots out there that perform better surgeries than surgeons, and there are robots that um, perform the surgery by a surgeon that's possibly somewhere else in the world. So you already have both of these things occurring.
Yeah, I was watching a video clip of a surgical robot stitching a kernel of corn, and I don't know if you've seen that, but it's gone around lately.
That one has gone around lately, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's pretty interesting and compelling, but yeah, as far as alternative meds, and actually, I'm not gonna go there because, like you said, I'm not a doctor, but there are. It seems to me like there are broad arrays of natural and holistic type medicines that we've used for, centuries that are useful for certain situations. Um, aging, aging is, um, I mean, I guess it's basically an oxidation. I mean, to age is to oxidize over time. Um, I've seen and read a little bit about oxygen therapy for treatment of cancer, and it's really interesting. And another, I mean, I guess you would call it a rabbit hole because I've not done the research, but attributing internal cancers like along the alimentary canal, and especially in the gut and the bowel, to the potential of parasites and the imbalances. We eat all of this sugar and some of the other substances we were talking about earlier. And number one, sugar and acidity feed cancers. And number two, we're supposed to have parasites within us, and there's supposed to be a healthy balance. But based on our diets, I really do wonder what the possibility is that we're actually throwing our gut biome out of, a historical alignment by eating grotesque amounts of sugars and other substances. So, again, I don't want to go too far into this, but I have some relatives with cancer, and I've kind of done a little bit of reading on fenbendazole and how that it does appear in certain cases to have an effect. And I don't really want to go any deeper, but again, it is. A commentary on the fact that we're not eating or being provided the right foods. And to just close this out really quickly, if you have means, it's much easier to eat a healthy diet than for somebody. And my family and we were doing very, very well for a while. I had an e-commerce business that was extremely successful, and we got to pick and choose anything that we wanted to eat. And the last few years have been more difficult for us, and we find ourselves, as a matter of convenience, because we're always running out the door or having to tend to things that basically provide for us. So we get so many of our foods out of a box or a package or the freezer now, and those are the things that are more affordable, they're easier, they're quicker, but they have the largest amount of toxins. Really quick to close out, when you go to the markets here in Paris, there's so much less packaged products. More products are at the very most in like a clear plastic container with no branding and a label on it, being like, pre-made salads and things like that. But it's not like where 90% of the store is in a red or flashy blue box with a logo on it. And it's really, I admire it. I wish it was easier for us to eat this healthy and affordably. Last thing I'll say, I don't really like bottled water. I live in Montana. Water's really fresh. We get it right out of our tap, put it through a Brita. In some places, I've had to buy bottled water. Here, you can buy a 6 liter pack of 6 liters fresh water, and it's less than $2 for the water. Whereas in the States, it would probably be about, I don't know, 3, 4, $5 for that.
That's interesting. Yeah, and there are definitely, it was a lot. Let me try and comment on what I can, and I think you're right. I got to wrap up the space. I went a little bit past what I meant to, but it was a fun conversation. So sugar, right? Sugar's an interesting one. So sugar cane actually contains a whole bunch of phytonutrients in it, and it is, in small dosage is actually beneficial for the metabolism in the body. Um, Sugar, though, whenever you see the product and it says sugar on it, that is actually typically genetically modified beets. And it's then the syrup from the beets that have been cooked down and then dried, oxidized, and then crystallized. And so that's like white sugar that we typically use, which is completely, it's just fat, right? It's 99% sucrose. It is disease waiting to happen, as you could put it. And so on top of that, you find that in a lot of products. You find that high fructose corn syrup, right, being the biggest one that is utilized as a fattener in the world. Uh, the high fructose corn syrup releases more endorphins in your brain than heroin does. I mean, it tricks your brain to not be able to process that you are full, and so you just want to keep eating. And there's a ton of effects on the body that sustain over a period of time. Um, but and then go to things like preservatives, right? I mean, your normal everyday box food has, sodium bicarbonates in it, and your aluminum dioxides and your titanium dioxides, and these are literally shards of metal that we're putting inside of our body. And it's like, it's tough because you don't feel it, right? You don't notice it's going on, but body has no idea how to organize and process this stuff. And then that's why you get things like heartburn, right? Because, I mean, to process something like titanium or aluminum, you figure our body is going to have to produce a ton of stomach acid, and that's this through this high pH, which will then, how it breaks it down. um, yeah, it's just, yeah, it's very difficult. I agree with you. And I have a rule too. Even if it's a boxed product and it doesn't even have nasty ingredients, you should still understand you're going to be ingesting chemicals, from bleaches to Cloroxes and irritation. I don't know why I said the same. I said a brand instead of a chemical, but to your ammonium carbonates and whatever it may be, because if it's in a box, it was put through a machine, and machines have to be cleaned, and that's just the process of it. Not only that, but the machine itself, metal, whatever it may be, steel or aluminum, all that kind of stuff that from the machinery itself. Yeah, it's inevitable. But Crypto Queen, welcome up. And if you'd like to jump in, I'm going to close up. But if you have some thoughts, please go ahead, and then we'll close up afterwards.
Oh, I've been listening. I haven't been able to speak. Thanks, Death Ranger. I'm struggling to look at screens for the last 2 days, so that's why I haven't jumped up sooner. But I was just listening on the sugar bit. So you're telling me my agave syrup in my container is no good, Death Ranger?
Ooh, agave syrup. Okay, so here's the difficulty with it. The agave syrup, that if you went out and you got like an agave plant and then you cold pressed the agave plant and then you took that and you cooked it into a pot, you could make your own agave syrup. That would be somewhat reasonable for you to use. The problem is the way that the body processes agave syrup. It's just it uses it as pure fat. It looks at it as somewhat very similar to sugar, because to get agave syrup, you had to do all of these processes, right? Cooking out all of these nutrients to kind of create the agave syrup to be syrup. Um, it's not like syrup, you when you well, yeah, even that, right? I mean, you think about maple syrup, where they, tap into the sap of a tree and that leaks out. That's not necessarily what syrup is, right? That syrup has to then be cooked down with water for a whole bunch of time until they kind of get that sticky, ooey gooey substance. But yeah, it's just that whole process of it occurring and having to go through that, and then you have to wonder, okay, how did they even make this agave syrup? Because it's probably right from being mass produced, and so whatever techniques they use for that, that's probably where the inefficiencies come down for you ingesting it. Unfortunately, I was on it for a little bit too. Agave syrup. I tried to use it for a little bit, and man, there's a couple health coaches I spoke to and holistic preachers, I should say, I could call them, and everyone
So
swore.
what
Everyone
can I
swore
have instead of what can I have then? Can I just go to my pure honey then?
honey is the best thing that you could do, especially you want to get local honey because the bees
Yes.
in your local area are going to be pulling the pollen from your local area, and that will actually help your body build resistance to the allergies in your area. So local honey for sure, the best thing that you could ingest. And there's nothing wrong with the little sugar cane. The if you're going to go out and buy sugar cane, say a product in a bag, or if you buy it in bulk, if you have anywhere that buys raw sugar cane and does it themselves, the darker the better. The darker it is, the closer it is to the plant. And there's nothing wrong with a little bit of sugar cane, just not too much. You rot your teeth.
Thanks, thanks, Death Ranger.
I definitely am a major proponent of local honey. My son has always had allergies since he was little, and feeding him that good local honey and from a variety of different flowers. But it's been helpful, and it's also fun. I mean, it was fun to source. We'd end up at a lot of local markets buying from the small producers, and that's the best way to guarantee that you do get really good pure honey, and the people are nice. I was doing leather work, and one of the vendors gave me a 2 pound chunk of beeswax that I'll never use because for some of the tools, the chisels and stuff that you poke into leather and do that work with, you actually coat them as a lubricant with beeswax. It is really fun buying local honey, and it's really amazing the people that you end up supporting. And in Montana, when it's winter, because we have 7 months, they box up all their bees and send them to California to pollinate the almond crops. And almonds aren't my favorite; they're very water intensive. But it's kind of a cool story how the bees kind of come back and forth. But great space, Death Ranger. You're doing a great job, and everybody in your space are people I really look up to a lot. So I'm glad I dropped in and get to hang out with you guys. It's almost midnight here, but gosh, these kind of conversations fuel me. I love being around smart and aware people. So thank you.
No, thank you for coming, man. And you know, it was really a great conversation. 808, you come up right at the end, man. I gotta close up. But if you have any thoughts or anything you want to jump in, I will give you a minute. And McQuack, you also came up, so I'll give you guys both a minute if you guys have any questions or thoughts or anything you want to add in.
No, I was gonna say you said something about cane sugar that is a little bit just a little bit off. Cane sugar actually doesn't destroy your teeth. There's actually enzymes within raw cane sugar that actually helps with gingivitis and gum disease. So if you actually really chew real cane, is actually better for you than actual real sugar. So even the juices are much better for you than regular sugar, which you can use as a substitute rather than having it powderized. Which if it's used in a regular drying technique, like how they make so when it doesn't go through the process of cooking it. So what I mean is when they go through the
Yeah, the
process of
cold
how they
cold
make
press.
salt. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how my ancestors make salt by just air drying it with the sun and stuff has a different has a different process that it allows the sugar to contain its nutrients without cooking it, because when you cook it you burn off a lot of the natural nutrients, like how Death was saying. But so when you have it air dried and sun dried in a certain way, it allows it to retain all that nutrients, but it doesn't become white. So when the white processed sugar is what they go through a bleaching process doing the processing part of the sugar cane, which is wild because Hawaii has a extensive history with different types of sugar canes. Some created from uh, like pineapples. That well, the pineapples here was introduced, but we actually have a pineapple that is endemic to Hawaii that's not produced. It kind of died off, I believe, or is making a comeback in Kauai. But yeah, there's a lot. I'm sorry, but I always come late to your spaces. But yeah, I just wanted to hop in on that. And honey is another one. There is actually a guy going around saying bees regurgitate honey and feed honey to their babies. That's wrong. Bees don't feed honey to their babies. They don't even eat the honey unless they really have to during winter days, during the times where they run out of food. But what they feed their larva is something very interesting. People should look into that because is actually crazy how to separate the actual honey and what they actually eat and feed their babies, which is even so wild because nature, man, is so powerful. And when we understand these things, we can better understand ourselves even more. But yeah, I always love your spaces. Can't believe I missed this one too. I'm just so busy. But yeah, thanks again, Death. You're awesome.
No, no, you guys are awesome, and yeah, I'll try and keep it in line with these topics because I mean, health, nutrition, and food is super important, and I love talking about it. And I love that you came up to tell me. No, it does help your teeth. I know it's a benefit, but if you eat too much of it, at least when I was a little kid, when I was eating the cane sugar, I could totally tell when I ate too much of it. My whole mouth was so sticky, but it is delicious, nonetheless. And
Oh, just like pineapples, if you eat too much pineapple, the juices really does eat and away your calcium in your
yeah,
gum.
that was a great actually part pairing example. That was like on point. Um, Same exact feel. But I'm gonna close up. It was a fun conversation. I hope you're in here tomorrow, 808. I'll try and keep it around the same time if you're free and can make it, man. And yeah, everyone have a great rest of the night. I love you guys. This conversation wouldn't be what it was if it wasn't for all of you. McQuacked, I know you came up, but you're always so quiet. So hopefully see you in the next one too.
I'll keep a lookout and be on it this time.
You're the best, man. Aloha, guys.